broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico. I'm Christopher Garitano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch. Beware the Ides of March, for there will be debts to pay. The levees that separate fiction from reality, conspiracy from fact, broke once again sometime around March 13th, 2020. It's now a bleeding dam with enormous wounds. We've read about things like this in fiction. Everything from fears of a conspiratorial viral warfare to the implementation of a dystopian society, discovering life on other planets, and bizarre technologies that only the sci-fi of the past could allow. This is all happening. But most prominently, this all happened in the Twilight Zone. The proper definition of that term outside of a lesser-known lunar optical effect is also the namesake of the greatest television show of all time. In 1959, a brilliant ex-World War II paratrooper named Rod Serling graduated to immortal legend when the first episode of his masterpiece anthology aired on network TV. The episode was titled Walking Distance. The show is The Twilight Zone, offering a variety of science fiction and horror-related morality tales with profound subtext. It resonated so deeply with audiences. It went on to win 2 Primetime Emmy Awards and ran for 5 glorious seasons. It continues to capture our imagination even now, 60 years later. But what was it that really made The Twilight Zone immortal? What was it about Serling that lent depth, power, and a profound message to his creation? He grew up in small-town America in Poughkeepsie, New York. He experienced every tradition and comfort that a near mid-20th century suburban lifestyle would privilege him. With a well-groomed patriotic spirit to fight what he knew as the ultimate evil, Serling, a Jewish American, enlisted in the army at a mere 18 years old with the hopes to meet face-to-face in combat Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. He eventually encountered the worst kind of hand-to-hand violence, but not in Europe. With dangerous missions to the Philippines and Manila, Serling was forced to understand how wonderful the life behind him truly was. He had to kill to survive, and was appointed to a group called the Death Squad, and they lived up to their name. He endured the elements of treacherous weather, starvation, mental anguish, and sleep deprivation, all while living in the midst of an uncertain death sentence that could have been scheduled for any moment. It was the loss of innocence incarnate. Serling fired bullets that entered flesh, ending human lives. He murdered to survive. It was kill or be killed. There's one ironic Serling wartime story that stands out for me. His squad was starving for days, to the point of them eating roots and leaves from trees with the hopes of even minimal sustenance. Suddenly, from above, parachutes appeared in the sky, anchored by large U.S. Army ration crates. It was salvation at last. A war buddy named Levy was a natural comedian, laughing and dancing underneath the wonderful rain of descending rations. Serling and the rest of his squad called out in caution to Levy. The crates were coming in fast and weighed a considerable ton. The crate came crashing down on Levy's head. Serling and his crew watched in a state of pure terror as Levy was decapitated by the very rations that were meant to save him. Levy was gone. After the war, Serling returned with the soul-crushing effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. It resulted in nightmares all the way up to his death. The memories of war haunted him for life, but he did find a way to reduce the pain, to process and perhaps even hide from it. He found salvation in writing. He put every noteworthy experience into his work, and if you know about Serling's life, you'll see it in his masterpiece. On tonight's episode, I'm here keeping you company at the end of summer in the real Twilight Zone. Some say it's the apocalypse now. I beg to differ. But fear not, this has happened before, when that bizarre dark side leaks into our paths. Much like in Serling's anthology, there was always a lesson, something to learn so we all come out the other end transformed. Maybe we deal with it like Serling did. Perhaps that's the answer. Later tonight, our guest on the show is actor Edwin Neal. He scared the living hell out of me when I was a monster kid who was obsessed with scary movies. I saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was only 8 years old, and Edwin plagued my nightmares following. Much like Rod Serling, Edwin Neal witnessed the horrors of war, and he lived an incredible life. He'll tell us all about it tonight, and I'll be right back with you after this brief commercial break.
In 1968, George Romero reflected back at the world with his horror classic, Night of the Living Dead. Throughout 4 decades, from the rising dawn and on throughout land, he continued to inspire our nightmares. Now, 3 years after his death, George A. Romero returns from the grave with his final masterpiece, The Living Dead, a mammoth novel and his ultimate zombie epic. From Tor Books and co-authored by Daniel Kraus comes George A. Romero's The Living Dead. Find it wherever books are sold.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and tonight's guest is the mighty Edwin Neal. When I was a kid, the movie that scared me the most was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is still today as powerful as the first time I saw it. Edwin Neal played the maniacal hitchhiker, a character that was part of an insane trio of cannibal brothers who lure their victims to a macabre Texas farmhouse. With a performance so believable, his cinema images burned into my nightmares for years to come. I've always wanted to know the man behind the performance, and so here's my interview with Edwin Neal.
I was born in Houston, Texas, but they moved around, and we ended up in Kansas, right across in Kansas City, Kansas, right across the water from Kansas City, Missouri. I always thought that was very funny when I was little. Wait, there's a Kansas City, Kansas. There's a Kansas City, Missouri, and they're a mile apart. How does that work? Can you think of another name? But so my mom worked at the airport in Kansas City, Missouri. And so she would drive over there, and she would come home and regale us with stories about all the wonderful people that she had waited on during the day, like famous people and rich people and really strange people, as it turned out. At one time she came home, she goes, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened today." I said, "What happened today?" She goes, "I waited on Groucho Marx." I said, "You're kidding. Wow, Groucho Marx, I love his movies." I was about, I think, 3 or 4. I was going, "Groucho Marx, I love him. At the Circus, my favorite movie." And she goes, "Yeah, you won't like him after you hear this story." So she tells us.
Wait, did you get to meet Groucho?
No, I didn't get to meet him. She waited on him. He was, waiting, having a sandwich, and then he went to get on his airplane. But he leaves a dime for a tip. Now, you got to remember, Groucho grew up in the Depression. So to him, this is a lot of money. My mom picks the dime up, chases him all the way to the door, catches him at the front entrance to the restaurant and says, "Excuse me, you left this on the table." And he goes, "Oh, thank you," without missing a beat, puts it in his pocket, smiles, and walks out.
So let's flash forward a bit. I know that you fought in Vietnam, or you were stationed out there during the Vietnam War. What was it like when you arrived in Vietnam?
"Welcome to Vietnam, boys. I'd put your goddamn helmet on if I were you." So we're like, "Okay, I'll put the helmet on. It hurts my head, but I'll put it on anyway. Okay. There you go. Now at least probably your head will stay on when they have a direct hit. And we'll have more of you to bury." It was all very unclear at that time. Like, what are we even doing here? I kept asking that question over and over, and I got to tell you, I must have asked, I don't know, 80, 90 people. highly placed military people, lowly placed military people. None of them had an answer.
Was there ever a moment where you felt like you weren't going to make it out?
Oh, absolutely. You mean like the time that I went to the latrine and looked back and the hooch I had just left with 18 people in it was gone?
Wow. Let's take me to the beginning of that day and lead me through this story.
You got to understand, a lot of the people they had drafted, they were mental babies. They came from like Iowa, and they came from a farm, and the toughest day they'd ever had in their life was finding, where the three goats were hiding that they had to get back in the pen. That was the roughest day they'd ever had. They knew nothing. I'd come from Northside Houston, Texas. I'd seen warfare already, because the gangs and stuff. In my neighborhood, you got off the school bus and you sprinted all the way to your house because the gangs would drive up and down the streets with bricks trying to hit you in the back of the head with bricks. That was their form of entertainment. They didn't have cable TV. But here we are in Vietnam, and I'm listening to these openly weeping 19-year-old Iowa farm boys, and I went, oh my God, this is not good. So I would take their guard duty for them. Well, the only place we ever they would shell where we were internally, but they didn't come. They couldn't make it into the base camp because we usually stopped them at the guard stations, and that's where all the fighting took place. And that's what the Iowa farm boys were fearful of. So I would take their guard duty, and I would get there at twilight, and I'd pull my helmet down, close to over my face, and I'd get in the back of the truck that took you out to the guard posts, and they would say, Richardson, I go, here. And as long as they got a here, every time somebody said a name, they were good to go. I never got caught once. And they would pay me like $100, $200, $300, whatever they wanted. I didn't care. And I would just send the money home to my family. But I would go take their guard duty for them because, I was young and impenetrable at that point. I could stay up all night and go to work the next day without a problem and work all day.
Yeah, it still seems like you retain that energy regardless.
I'm blessed with a metabolism rate of a 19-year-old, and I'm going, but I wake up in the morning, hey, I feel good. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky. Now you understand something. This is Vietnam. Triple canopy jungle, everything grows beautifully. There were marijuana plants there 30 feet high. Wow. And remember, for those of you who don't know, marijuana is a weed. That's where the term comes from, weed. The operative word here, weed. It grows everywhere, pretty much where it wants to. And the mountain yards, the mountain people that lived in Vietnam, they always thought it was so bizarre that they could just grab a bag of this stuff out of their literal backyard, bring it to the American soldiers, and they would give them food and stuff for it. And they would try to explain to us, well, the translator, but it grows everywhere. You can just go pick some. And they go, no, we really can't wander through the jungle picking weed up. They'll shoot us. They won't shoot you because you live here and you have no weapons. They don't fear you. Here you are on guard duty with a regular Army guy who's got a large bag around his waist of some of the finest weed grown on our planet in the Vietnamese triple canopy jungle. And they would get so high, and they would remember now that we have M60s with bullets the size of Coca-Cola bottles. And, they would say, oh, I think I heard something over there, man. And they would use the M60 to kind of mow whatever was over there, because the bullets were so large. If you just go back and forth with it, nope, nothing there, because when you got done, there was nothing but bare earth. So if somebody was hiding behind a bush, you just eliminated the bush, And what would happen is they had these wonderful oxen that the Vietnamese used to till their farms with. Well, they let them roam around at night so they could eat, because they didn't have any. You don't go to the feed store in Vietnam and get cow food because there's no feed stores. Okay. So they have to eat off the land. So we'd hear this noise, and they'd go, "Oh wow, they're coming through the wire, man!" And they'd start shooting the M60s, and then in the morning when the sun would come up, you would see um, steaks, steaks lying all over the grounds where they just totally massacred and completely vivisected the animal. And here would come the little Vietnamese farmers going, "Bác Đăng Đăng, I seen them, I know, dink it out, you dink it out, you number 10,000, number 10,000." They went on a numerical system. And if you were a really good soldier and they liked you, you were number one, number hucking one. But if you were bad, you were number 10,000. That was the worst number they could give you.
So would you say later representations in cinema got it right, like Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket and stuff like that?
They got some of it right, but what I always noticed in the films were they never approached the absolute sinister sneakiness of the enemy. Because remember, this is an enemy that's smart enough to know, hey, we can't just go tearing in there, ripping and a roaring from one side, screaming and yelling. They were smart enough to know we can't do that because we're outgunned and we're outmanned. And so we have to be sneaky. Well, that's what I missed about all the films that were ever made. They were a sneaky bunch. I mean, they would dig a little hole, pull some grass over them, and have a little bag of rice and a little bag of water, and they would sit in that friggin' hole and wait for you to walk by for 2 days.
So that sneakiness must have really caused a lot of paranoia and anxiety.
Absolutely, because they would take these. You got to understand, they didn't have access a lot of times to, just call the factory and order up a bunch of weapons and stuff. Didn't work like that. They made almost a lot of the instruments of torture and death right out of the jungle. They would take a machete and they would chop down some bamboo and they would sharpen the end unto like it was like a spear, and they would cut it down to about 4 inches. And then they would dig down a little tiny bit of earth, and they would put about 100 of these across the path where you were going to walk, and then they would cover it with leaves. And the Americans would go do, and they'd go tearing through the little walkway instead of walking around. And the spikes would go all the way up through their feet, through the boot, and then they would fall over and they would go through their body, and they would be impaled like 100 times. What did that cost them? It cost them about 28 minutes worth of time and a little bit of effort with their machete. And they killed lots and lots of Americans with these stupid punji sticks.
Wow. So this was a measure of us kind of invading people in their own backyard, and they knew their backyard well and we didn't.
Absolutely. They knew every inch of that land. Even though they're from South Vietnam, they would get there early and just, wander about and totally familiarize themselves with everything that was there. And then of course they dug massive tunnels everywhere. The Mexican drug cartels, whenever I would tell them about these tunnels, they go, "Man, I wish we could dig like that, man. That wow, we could have like $1 million a day, I say." But it was like they would dig tunnels. I mean, we're talking long tunnels. And they would just run down underneath the tunnels and come up 100 yards away. And the American mind can't get his head around the tenacity that it took to dig a friggin' 100-yard tunnel, and sprint to the other end and get out. It's so far away in the Triple Canyon Jungle, you wouldn't even be able to see them. They'd come out the other end of the tunnel and run away. Go, "Where'd they go, man? I don't know. They were here a minute ago." Well, they ain't here now.
Were you at all briefed that that's how they operated?
Oh yeah, they would tell you some things like "No, be careful where you walk." Oh, for landmines? No, they don't have a lot of landmines, but what they do have is little bamboo sticks that will kill you as quick as a landmine if you fall down on about 100 of them. Yeah, they would tell you, and whatever you do not pick up an AK-47 that's laying there right on the ground for a trophy. because it has 2 wires to it, and when you pick it up, it pulls the pin out of the bomb that they do have, and you could kiss your butt goodbye because you're going to land up on top of the triple canopy jungle. Yeah, they would just leave AKs laying around, and they go, "Oh wow, I'm going to send this to my uncle." You know.
And that's horrific. See, a lot of the listeners will never understand what that is truly like.
What happens is you get fearful of everything. You get fearful of when you hear a fly buzz. You go, "What's that, man?" It's a fly. Oh, okay. Well, what's that? It's a moth. Oh, okay. Yeah, you just got fearful of everything. And one of the hardest things that I have to explain to people is that when you're in a situation like that, everything is heightened. Everything is like it's like your vision increases, your hearing increases, your sense of smell's off the chart. You can smell fear. You can actually smell fear on another human being.
Describe to me what it's like to smell
Your body can't, when you get that fearful, you got these sweat glands that are working in a strange way that they've never worked before because they're being controlled by your body that, it goes back to the caveman days. It's not anything that they don't understand. They do understand it. It's called fight or flight. You either fight the dinosaur or you run like a maniac and hide under a rock and he can't eat you. But nothing has changed, but that smell, that amazing smell. I used to do all kinds of fun stuff to try and bring it down. Like, for example, they'd be shooting at us and I'd wait till there was a little lull and I would scream really loud. Like, hey, you! What the hell are you shooting at me for? You don't even know me. And then they would laugh, and then we'd know where they were.
So they would hear you, and they would giggle.
They would giggle, and we could hear them, and we know what bush they were behind.
Wow.
I thought, you dumb shit.
But at what point did you realize, instead of it turning into some kind of horrible detriment that just ended you psychologically and physically, at what point did you realize you could use that to your advantage?
I didn't realize that until I got back, because like you said, I was going through some PTSD from having lost some awfully fine folks, some really sweet kids, and they were kids. And then so I went through that, and because I had friends that were in the regular army who were, who were on the front lines. I certainly wasn't, but they were, and never even found their body. Like I said, never even found their bodies. But so I lost a lot of people that way, and then I didn't process it until I started going to classes for PTSD at the Veterans Administration, the VA in Austin, Texas. They had some great classes, and they had these wonderful people who were psychologists and therapists trying their best to here's what your life can be. Don't let it become this, because you got to understand, when a lot of guys came back, they were drug dependent. And if you had an addictive personality at all, there wasn't a drug on this planet you couldn't find in Vietnam. Even the South Vietnamese would bring drugs. It would be like they'd open up a suitcase. What do you need? I got meth. I got, they had everything. They had heroin. What do you need? But it was so cheap too, because just when they figured out that the American soldiers liked drugs, here they came with their suitcases.
So that almost was a kind of an implement of their warfare, was to kind of get everybody hooked up on drugs.
Absolutely. The North Vietnamese would give girls, the B girls in the nightclubs, where if you went a little R&R in country, and you're like Vung Tau, you went down to Vung Tau. Now it was a weird situation in Vung Tau because you had this beautiful beach. Vung Tau is a beautiful coastal Vietnamese city where in the old days, the colonial French had developed it and were mining it. And you had all these French villas all of a sudden in the middle of Vietnam. You go, hello, what's this in? Well, they were built by the French back when. And now, but they had a little line drawn in the sand. And the American soldiers are on this side of the line on the beach, and the North Vietnamese soldiers are on that side. And there was no fighting because everybody was there to have rest and recuperation. Now, you try and explain that to people who think they know about warfare. What the hell was that all about? The enemy's 14 feet away from me and I can't shoot him. How stupid was that? Anyway, it was bizarre. But anyway, they would go down and they would take all these drugs. The North Vietnamese would take the drugs to all the girls that worked in the bars, and they would give them to the American soldiers when they came in. And a lot of times they were tainted drugs. Sometimes they were just regular drugs, but they were trying to get them hooked. They developed a strain of syphilis called black syphilis. And they would infect intentionally the prostitutes, South Vietnamese prostitutes, and then they would, will kill your whole family if you don't fuck 5 American soldiers a night. And they would give them the black syphilis because some of the soldiers were stupid enough to do that. But they did have classes on that when we got in country. They said, don't do it. And there was a place in Japan called Camp Zama, Japan, where if you contracted black syphilis, you couldn't go home. You had to go to an internment camp at Camp Zama because they couldn't let you back in the United States because there was no treatment for it. They couldn't cure it. And if you came to the United States and gave it to everybody, well, it would create what we've got now. So they would a lot of times they would opt out of letting their family know, and they had the option of saying they were MIA, missing in action. And they weren't. They were slowly dying of black syphilis, Camp Zama, Japan.
Ed, first of all, obviously the performance that we're all familiar with, complete to this moment, and I've seen the movie well over 100 times, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Your performance in that movie continues to blow me away. I see new things in it all the time. So you getting back from Vietnam, which was ultimately a horrific experience, which affected you. You come back and you put all of that into plays, right? Stage
Yeah,
plays.
plays, and in the movie, I just unloaded every time I got a chance.
Wow.
It was one of the only catharsis things I could work through. You can do anything you want. And it's short of just going so far over the top. You're all of a sudden you're Dennis Hopper on meth. Remember when he did that series of commercials where he was like hiring a kite? Oh my God! But so as long as you were able to pull it back, to where it was palatable to a viewing audience,
And so, at that time, you're on fire, and that also was a very different time for cinema. It seemed like everybody was open to tap into that deep and sometimes abysmal emotions to harness that for a picture or a play. And these days, it's slightly different. And I mean, would you say that some of the greatest motion pictures or even stage plays wouldn't exist without the pain that was experienced beforehand?
I think that's true because there were so many actors and actresses who were able to channel those emotions into a visible, visceral form.
And it seems like trauma does that sometimes, not all the time. Obviously, trauma completely puts people out of commission. They have no inspiration. But in your case, you were able to process that. And going back to Serling for a second, he had a similar experience. He was a paratrooper. He fought in a company called the Death Squad, and he wasn't happy. He saw a lot of the same things you did, and came back and was a wreck, and but ended up processing that into his writing eventually.
What always amazed me was that I'd almost get on my knees at night when I went back to the barracks when I was in Vietnam because I had, my life was so, I just wondered, what would you do? What would you do, Ed, if you were in the regular Army part and you had to stay on the front lines 24/7? You'd be nuts. You'd be nuts.
So you come back and you have all of that experience and that knowledge of how it affected people after, and you're processing it the way you need to, but it's also something positive. And so How far after that did you stumble across this little production in Austin, Texas, not at that time called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Leatherface, head cheese. It was, it was called Head Cheese, and then it was called Leatherface, and yeah, I was at the University of Texas in the drama department, and I was doing both acting work and preparing to be a high school teacher of drama and taking courses in drama education, and they came to the drama department. Toby did. He wanted real actors, people who can actually portray different emotions. So he thought he'd come get some drama people. So he put a note on the board, and I came back from drinking beer at noon, and we didn't learn our lines for acting class, so we said, well, we'll just get sloshed and we'll just make them up. But so we sloshed back to the drama department, and a little girl outside, of course, says, oh, you're going to audition for the movie? And we said, what movie? So we go in on the board and we read the little announcement, and we run upstairs. We go, oh, let's go see what the crap this is all about. We look at each other, and my two friends and I, we look at each other, and we hear Toby talking to one of the people that's already trying out. And I lean over and I go, let's wind this guy up. And they go, okay, you go first. So he comes up to me, and he had a little Clint Eastwood cigar in his mouth. He goes, hey, can you be weird? And my two friends, of course, go to the floor. They start yelling, can he be weird? You got the guy right there, right there. So he goes, come on over. So I go, and I thought, well, what can I do to wind him up? I just get him out of here so we can get on to our acting class, something important, rather than this cockamamie Z movie that they're trying to make, because we're looking at the sides and we're giggling our butts off because you want me to say what? We're thinking, this is stupid. So I go, and then I immediately said, oh, I know what I'll do. To wind him up, I'll do my truly paranoid schizophrenic nephew, who does all that stuff with a hand, with his hands up around his face. He does all that stuff. So I start doing my nephew, and the look of fear in Hooper's eyes, I'll never forget as long as I live, because he was like, whoa, he was fearful. And I thought, oh, I better tone it down a little bit. But it was too late. He was already backing up, like, oh my God. So I thought, well, we got rid of his ass, and we went on, over to next door to the acting class. Well, here comes Kim Hinkle a couple of days later up at I worked up at I was cataloging collections up at the Harry Ransom Center. And he found out where I worked. They told him down at the drama department, oh, he's up at the Harry Ransom. So here he comes with a contract. He says, here's a contract, Ed. We want you to be in this film. I said, well, I'm a stage actor. I do Shakespeare, Moliere, Ennui. I couldn't possibly do a horror film. It's so beneath me. And he goes, well, we just think you'd be really good in it. And I think, well, and I thought to myself, I said, well, what the hell? Nobody will ever see it. And they're going to give me a couple $100 a week. And he goes, well, I know that's not a lot of money. I said, no, it's not. I had no idea whether it was a lot of money or not, but I said, no, it's not. And he said, well, you are, and you're also going to own part of the film. I said, really? Where do I sign? And then I signed. And I thought in myself after he left, I was, well, how bad can it be? Nobody's ever going to see it.
Just a note on that. You and everybody else had no idea.
Nobody had a clue. It was such a happy luck thing for everyone involved. Toby and Kim, it's like winning the film lottery. You got a cast that was amazing. You got a crew that was willing to work 24/7. They had amazing people on the crew. And so, but just absolute sheer luck that all these people came together at that one moment. Terry Terry McMillan wasn't even in the drama department. She was at the college down the way, uh, and they just auditioned her by chance, you know. But it was just Gunnar wasn't in the drama department. Gunnar was editing and writing a poetry magazine at the time, and got the part because another guy didn't want to wear the mask.
So it makes you wonder, these things like this, something with that much impact, is there some kind of, and I don't want to say, I don't really want to lean towards the divine, but is there something on a subatomic or a molecular level that brings all of these things together for the purpose of it affecting so many people? And, you cannot deny, no one can, if you, especially if they're not in the know, do your research, that the movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, has it started in a group of people that Ed is explaining in Austin, Texas, and went and expanded and continues every day. Someone in the world, a lot of people in the world are watching that movie right now. Let's get back to why. I want to take you back to the set or to the experience making the picture, because there's all of those reactions, and that many years later, all of that originates with what happened that summer when you were filming the movie. So take me back there.
Well, one of the overlying tenets of the production was that it was so intense because you had a bunch of equipment that you'd rented that you got to have back by 9 in the morning, or you're going to owe another $80 and you got $70. It was like that. So we would like film all day. We'd film all night. We'd film. and they were trying to figure out, we don't have 8 sets of dolly track. We have 2 and they go and sit on the ground and draw in the dust like kids playing sandlot football. Like, you run over there. They were trying to figure out where they're going to put the camera, how they're going to put the camera. We were working it out as we went. And because of the intensity of that, you're never knowing what's what. Nobody has the ability to step back in that moment and go, this is working well. This is going to be really successful. You didn't have that because we didn't have a clue what we were doing. The totality of it.
So it was that intensity and that desire for the main players, at least, to keep, forging ahead, getting something accomplished, getting this done right, really all in the moment, all of that intensity a lot of people don't get. And then even the problems. I mean, do you feel like the problems served your performance?
That's absolutely true, Christopher. It's absolutely true, because we would be faced with, well, we can't put the camera there because you see the tree. Well, we can't. And we go, oh, hell's bells. And we just collectively figure out, and suggestions would come from the lowliest crew members. Well, why don't you put it right there, and it goes right. Toby was so lucky that he had all of these people, and I mean, a high percentage of them very talented and trying to do their best in impossible odds, because the hours were impossible, the conditions were impossible. We didn't even have. There were nights we didn't even have bug spray, and we were out there in the country in August in Texas, where it was 105 at 9 o'clock at night. The mosquitoes were the size of dachshunds.
Not to get too metaphysical, but at the same time, you have all of these people who aren't getting paid much, and they're in a way suffering. It's almost like you're at war. But at war, you would have been thrown in jail if you walked out of there.
And that's the way we felt when people would try to leave, or they'd try to go home early. We'd go, get your ass back here. If the rest of us are sitting here, you're gonna sit. It was like that, like they were traitors if they left, or if they had to go. I got to run back to my day job for an hour. No, tell them you're sick or something. You keep your ass here. We're all in this together.
What was it that compelled everyone's dedication at that time? Because only you know, and only the people that are there know.
But we were. It was like us against the world. Marilyn and I would sit on the ground and we'd hold hands and we'd go, it's us against the world, Ed. And I know, Marilyn, I know. We got to get this done. We can do this.
You must have had some kind of gut feeling. You must have had some kind of feeling that this was important.
It felt important because what happened was we were watching a few of the rushes and going, you know what? If we just take this up a notch next time we do it, or if we take that up a notch, I think we got something here. But it wasn't like we knew, but we knew we had something. We didn't know what the hell it was.
So we're back. We're back. This is the summer of 1973, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. The summer of 1973. How many years out of Vietnam was
Well,
that for you?
I was there 68, the top of 69, and I got back to graduate school. I was back in graduate school by 1970, so it was just a couple of years later.
Okay. And did you feel, and, pardon me if this question sounds ridiculous, but did you feel adjusted by that time, or
That's a very fair question, and no, I didn't. I at that point, even still in 1973, I was. The psychologists call it walking the perimeter. What that means is when you've gone through an intense experience like that, your body becomes conditioned to, if you hear a slight noise, you're instantly awake. Because in the situation you were in, if you don't get up, you're dead. And so what happens is you walk the perimeter. You're walking the perimeter of, you're on guard duty, and you're walking all around the perimeter of the camp, guarding to make sure nobody gets in, and you're reacting to every smell, every sight, every sound, every movement, a bird flutter. You have to react, because if it's an enemy, you have to react immediately or you're dead. So that's walking the perimeter. So when there were nights when I would wake up in a deep sweat, and my mind, when I'd hear a car backfire outside, God forbid, car backfires for a long time were a really bad thing. but you would, for most of the rest of the night, sometimes walk the perimeter.
And so you're still, these feelings are still fresh. I mean, who knows? I hear a lot even now, Vietnam vets, even to this day. And again, I don't know if I'm getting too personal, but do you still experience dreams and feelings from that time?
They're
even now?
less intense and they're less often, because I've put so much in my life. I catalog. For example, I'm cataloging 8,200 old 78 records, and I've enmeshed myself in music history from 1902 to 1950. And it's just an amazing body of music, and I'm so taken with it. I'm finding people that, Harold Burfel and his Timpani Five, people you never heard of, but the musicianship was so good. And so I found things like that, and to put my energies into, to where the dreams and the bad dreams are less and less.
So, but back then, they must have been quite intense.
Absolutely. They just tapered off slowly over the years.
So in a way, do you feel like being on that set was a way to kind of distract you from any of those feelings? You were involved in something new or something intense or almost another.
Exactly. It was I was channeling all of the pent up when we got into that the scene in the van where he cuts his hand. When we got into that thing, I saw that look on Hooper's face for the second time. Because you got to understand something. He didn't come up with the character. I did. He said one line to me the entire filming process. One line of direction the entire time.
But the one thing, see, Noah, clearly you came up with it, but the one thing in Tobe Hooper's favor is that he did not say no to you.
I don't, that's interesting. I don't recall him ever saying no, because I could gauge what I was doing when I've got the three actors in the front seat of the van, Jerry, Terry, and Marilyn. they're all looking over the seat, and the camera, Toby and them are on the back of the seat facing the back of the van, and I'm in, where I am. But I'm seeing this look, because we hadn't had a lot of rehearsal. And I'm looking, and after I got into it, I see these looks of horror on the cast's face, and they're real. They're in real time. And the look of horror on Hooper's face, and that's in real time. And it was only at that moment that I knew, wow, that this is working.
Going back there, were you were aware of the audience in front of you on the set, but did you at that time, and I don't know, maybe it sounds pretentious, right? But sometimes we have to be when you're constructing something for an audience. You have to assume, wow, did you imagine people sitting at a drive-in or
No,
a movie
I
theater
did not.
watching?
I was judging all of what I was doing off of the faces of the cast and crew on the other side of the camera watching me perform in that scene. I could tell immediately. Like it's what comes from being a stage actor. You know exactly at every moment how you're doing when you're on stage. You can see their reactions. You can tell whether the laughter is genuine. You can tell whether the crying is fake. You can tell.
So the fact that you terrified Hooper, did that encourage you to push it even further?
Yep, yes, it did. One time we were Jim Seedow, the cook, one of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. He was a wonderful man, and I'd give anything in the world to have him here now. He had a real wonderful way of talking. Hey, Christopher, how you doing there? It's really good to meet you. Well, I could do Jimmy Seedow as well as Jimmy. And so we do dueling Jimmys on the set to amuse ourselves. And one time we're going to have a rehearsal where he jumps out of the truck, and I'm walking around dangling my little fox fur thing in the dirt, and he jumps out and beats me with the oak dowel that was supposed to be balsa wood, but it wasn't. Well, we were going to do the rehearsal, and I said, hey, let's wind Hooper up. And he goes, okay, Eddie, I'll follow you. So we start rehearsing, and he goes, come here, you nap-haired idiot. And I go, hey, don't yell at me. And I do it in Jimmy's voice. Hey, don't yell at me. Okay, well, come on over here. No, I don't want to go over there. You can hit me with that stick. No, I'm not. All of a sudden, we look up, and Hooper's got this look of absolute horror on his face. And he turns to Jay Parsley, the producer, and he goes, what are they doing? Parsley leans over, and we could hear him. He goes, well, Toby, I think they're messing with you. And he goes, cut that out. And we both turn to him at the same time and go, okay.
So we're agreeing that it is other things that serve that finality that's on the screen for the audience. There are other things happening, and it's a dance. And so I would say perhaps the most intense scene in the movie, and there are a lot of them, is that dinner scene at the end. Can you take me back there and tell me a little bit about what happened behind the scenes?
The dinner scene is, we called it the shoot from hell, because it lasted all that time, because we filmed day and we filmed night. We just kept on filming because they had to have the camera equipment back and all that. But it was probably the most intense acting experience I've ever had, because you were allowed moments of respite where they'd be setting another shot up, and then you would have to go right back into it and take it right back up to 10. It wasn't like a dinner sequence where we're sitting around. I think I'll have some more steak, Reginald. Thank you, Harry. It wasn't like, just a casual conversation around a dinner scene. It was this intense scene where this woman is tied up and being tortured and they're eating human flesh in front of her. It was like, this doesn't come up very often, no. But it was for example, the rag that's in Marilyn's mouth that they tied with a sisal piece of rope into her mouth where she couldn't spit it out if she wanted to. was a rag that they had used to wipe the counter with over where they were preparing the prop meat that was put on the table. Well, there were chunks of meat in this rag that had been there for a week. But Toby picks it up and goes, "Hey, this looks great." Yeah, it was a wonderful looking prop. It wasn't very sanitary, but they put that in her mouth. And part of her performance, she told me later, was because she could barely breathe. Because the rag, not only is the taste of the rotting flesh, meat flesh in her mouth, the smell of the meat is a quarter of an inch away from her nose, the rag. Yeah. So,
I mean, Marilyn Burns was amazing in that role.
indeed.
You were all amazing in that movie. And the thing is, your performances, and I am not just saying this, are better than most of these pandering, biased Academy Awards that seem to happen every year. Those performances, I'm just in awe of the fact that anyone even likes them. And just the true, I don't want to say realism,
Well,
because films aren't real.
I got to send a check off to Rob Zombie, because the great Rob Zombie, who said in an interview, it's a thing in the Time Warp, the world's greatest cult movies. It just came out. It's a wonderful documentary by Danny Wolf out of LA. Great guy, very, very clever. But he did this documentary and he interviews Rob Zombie, and Rob says, "Well, Neal should have gotten an Academy Award." And I'm going, and all I could think of was like, I don't think they give Academy Awards for cockamamie performances in a horror movie. But I mean, but to your question, I'm asking, how could that possibly? Because Rob's been through a lot. He's directed some great stuff. He's performed some of the best music ever, but it's intense music. These are not power ballads, but how does he get to that point? That Ed Neal should get an Academy Award. What moved him to that point?
The same thing that moved me to that point, and the same thing that moves a lot of people who have a taste for cinema and understand it outside of just watching a bunch of horror movie sequels. Some of my favorite movies are, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Citizen Kane, Apocalypse Now, and I hold Chainsaw up with all of them. Again, this has been a great interview, but to close it, what would you say at this time in your life, looking back, what would you say was the one thing that you'll take with you if your consciousness moves on to the next place? What is the one thing you're going to take with you?
If I had it to do over again, I'd do it over a liquor store. No, wait, that's my grandfather. My grandfather told me that one time. All that I'm going to take with me is that I can do anything, because I survived Vietnam. I survived the movie industry, and they were both against all odds. And I feel confident, not arrogant, but confident that I can, if you ask me to do something, I will either be able to do it or come pretty damn close.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and I want to thank you all for taking this first journey with me. Off to the Witch is a project that I was genuinely interested in going forward with. My intention is to bring you something special, and I'll continue to. Our next episode will premiere the night of October 30th, as we're celebrating my absolute favorite holiday. But before I go, I want to close with something positive. The themes of this show, however dark they may be, will always have a purpose. Tonight's theme was focused on processing the darkness into inspiration, as Rod Serling did, as Edwin Neal did, and as I myself did. It was real-life horror that made the artist, not just horror movies. So, in these troubled times, maybe the universe is giving us all something. Maybe the darkness is a mysterious gift after all. When I was 8 years old and my dad would show us a weekend double feature of horror movies, I couldn't keep my eyes off of them, but I was too terrified to go to sleep right after. He wasn't having it, and he would sing that old 50s tune, "Good Night, Sweetheart, Good Night" by the Spaniels, as an anthem to suggest, deal with it, kid, and go to bed. I would lay in the dark, terrified of going to sleep, but I convinced myself that I had one of two choices: nightmares or dreams. It was either nightmares or dreams. It all depends on your perspective. You're all at the wheel now. Make the decision where you want to go with this Twilight Zone. So, good night, sweetheart. Good night.